You're listening to Ideology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Alexander H. Stephens, who was temporarily serving as Vice President of the Confederate States, delivered a significant speech at the Athenaeum in Savannah, Georgia, on March 21, 1861. This speech took place just before the Civil War commenced. In his speech, famously known as the Cornerstone Speech, Stephens made a case for slavery, arguing it was justified based on the assumed innate inferiority of black people. He highlighted the key differences between the Confederate States and the United States in terms of their constitutions, ideologies, and the reasons behind the Confederacy's decision to secede. Stephens referred to the term cornerstone to emphasize what he described as a vital truth behind secession and the foundation of the Confederacy: white supremacy and the subjugation of black people. To directly quote him, "Our new government foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." He further invoked biblical references, notably Psalm 118, verse 22, to argue that divine law destined black Americans to a state of slavery, making it a fundamental aspect of the Confederacy's societal structure. Our Confederacy is founded upon principles in strict conformity with these laws. This stone, which was rejected by the first builders, has become the chief of the corner, the real cornerstone in our new edifice. The Cornerstone Speech was given after 7 states, including South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, had seceded, but before the Civil War had officially begun with the attack on Fort Sumter in mid-April. At this point, widespread violence had not yet occurred, although there were some incidents like the attack on the U.S. steamship Star of the West. Stephens noted the peaceful nature of secession up to that time, stating it had been achieved without the loss of a single drop of blood. In a speech that took a controversial stand against the beliefs of the Founding Fathers, especially Thomas Jefferson, for their opposition to slavery and their Enlightenment ideals, Alexander Stephens strongly criticized these views. He argued that the Founding Fathers were mistaken in believing all races were equal. Stephens pinpointed the issue of enslaving black Americans as the key reason for secession and highlighted that the Confederate Constitution addressed and resolved these disagreements. He noted, "The new Constitution has permanently settled the questions around our specific institution, African slavery as we practice it, and the appropriate place of black people within our society." This issue was the direct cause of the recent split and ongoing revolution. Jefferson predicted this would be the divisive issue for the Union. He was right. What he guessed at has now become reality, but it's questionable if he fully understood the deep truth underlying that division. The common belief at the time the original Constitution was framed was that enslaving Africans went against natural law and was wrong on every level. It was seen as a problem without an easy solution, but there was a general consensus that hopefully slavery would fade away. Those beliefs, however, were fundamentally incorrect based on the mistaken idea that all races are equal. Stephens argued that recent scientific advancements debunked the Declaration of Independence's assertion that all men are created equal, suggesting that the slavery of black Americans by white people was justified and aligned with biblical teachings. He declared that the Confederacy was the first nation built on the principle that white people are superior. Our new government is based on the direct opposite viewpoint. It's built on the undeniable truth that black people are not equal to white people and that their natural state is one of slavery and subordination to the superior race. This new government is the world's first to be established on this significant physical, philosophical, and moral truth. He also mentioned that the Confederacy's stance on human inequality was in line with what he considered the laws of nature. "We are confident that the truths our government is based on will eventually be universally recognized. This is the first government to be established according to the principles that truly align with the natural order and divine providence." The U.S. Declaration of Independence's phrases "laws of nature" and "all men are created equal" were key to Lincoln's argument that he was defending the Founding Fathers' principles by opposing slavery. However, figures like John C. Calhoun and Stephen A. Douglas disputed what "all men are created equal" meant. Calhoun argued it was unique to Jefferson's thinking, not a universal truth, while Douglas asserted it applied only to white men. Against this backdrop, Stevens's speech has been interpreted as confirming Lincoln's reading of the Founding Fathers' intentions, but advocating for racial inequality. After the defeat of the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery, Stevens attempted to backtrack on his earlier assertions, denying that he had said slavery was the Confederacy's reason for seceding. Instead, he claimed his belief was that the war was rooted in constitutional disputes. In a speech, Stevens explained that the Confederate Constitution eliminated tariffs and halted the federal government from funding local initiatives, such as road improvements. He argued that it was more equitable for those who directly benefited from such projects, like the individuals utilizing the Georgia Railroad to bear the costs. He provided an example. The expenses for constructing and equipping the railroad were shouldered by the people involved in the project. They also had to pay a significant amount to the government just for importing iron into the country, which was then utilized to fund improvements in other areas. Stevens questioned the fairness of this arrangement, arguing if a harbor in Charleston required maintenance, then the merchants of Charleston should fund it rather than relying on federal funds. He emphasized that in their new system there would be a distinct division between the responsibilities of the federal government and those allocated to each state. This stance was reminiscent of South Carolina's position during the nullification crisis, which opposed the federal government's financial support for local projects. On the procedural aspect, Stevens believed that aligning the Confederate Constitution more closely with the framework of the United Kingdoms would have been preferable, but acknowledged that it was an enhancement over the U.S. Constitution, even so. He valued that in the Confederate system, cabinet ministers and heads of departments could participate in Senate and House of Representatives meetings, engaging in discussions. This was in contrast to the U.S. system, where figures such as the Secretary of the Treasury were unable to directly present their budget to Congress, instead having to depend on the media for communication. Furthermore, he endorsed the concept that the president should be limited to a single 6-year term to eliminate the temptation of exploiting the position for personal advantage, aiming to ensure the leader's focus remained on fulfilling the responsibilities of the office rather than on politics or re-election efforts. The Confederate Constitution simplified the process for new states to join. Stevens was confident that North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas would soon become members, followed later by Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri. He believed the original 7 seceding states possessed everything necessary to form a prosperous republic. With a population of 5 million, including black individuals, and a land area larger than France, Spain, Portugal, and the United Kingdom combined, these states had substantial resources. They owned taxable property valued at $2.2 billion and had minimal debts of only $18 million, in stark contrast to the remaining United States, which had a debt of $174 million. Stevens was optimistic about the quick withdrawal from Fort Sumter, a vital U.S. military base in South Carolina, but hesitated concerning the approach towards Fort Pickens and other U.S. forts along the Gulf. Despite the Confederacy being established peacefully thus far, Stevens hoped to maintain peace not only with the North, but with the world. However, he anticipated that the U.S. would not choose a peaceful path. He criticized the Republicans for their stance on slavery. They opposed its expansion but refused to let slave states secede. He highlighted a contradiction in the Republicans' actions. They were against the expansion of slave territories but unwilling to relinquish any they already controlled. Even as they objected to slavery, their opposition remained consistent whether it was about acquiring Texas or its secession. Stevens suggested that, despite their claims of humanity, their actions were driven by the economic benefits derived from slave labor. He believed that their primary objective was to collect taxes from this labor to support their expensive government projects. Stevens concluded by stating that the success or failure of the Confederate regime would ultimately depend on the character of its people. When the Civil War erupted and the Confederacy would not exchange captured black Union soldiers for Confederate prisoners, Union leader Benjamin Butler highlighted a fundamental issue. He pointed out to the Confederates that their entire opposition to the U.S. government was built on the belief in owning people as property. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass spoke about this in 1863 in Pennsylvania, urging black men to join the fight for the Union. He referenced the clear distinction made by Confederate leader Stevens between the principles of the Confederate government, which saw black people as inferior and enslavable, and those of the federal government. Historian Harry V. Jaffa, in his 2000 book A New Birth of Freedom, deeply examines this speech. He believes it captures the essence of the Confederacy and the later Jim Crow South better than any other document from that time. Jaffa also draws a parallel between the racism of the Confederacy, as outlined by Stevens, and that of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, noting similarities in their visions for the future and ideologies. The speech in question was not prepared in advance. After the war, Stevens tried to minimize the role of slavery in the Confederacy's secession, blaming misquotes and errors in the reporting. He even claimed in an 1868 book that the issues were constitutional rather than about slavery. Yet the volume of supposed misquotes he cited makes this defense hard to believe. Furthermore, there's a story that Jefferson Davis, the Confederate leader, was upset with Stevens for admitting that slavery was a key reason for the secession, as Davis was seeking support from countries unfavorable to slavery. However, there's no real evidence to support this claim. Neither Davis, his wife Verena, Stevens, nor their official biographers mention any such conflict. This narrative seems to have been fabricated by a biographer in 1959, adding to the complexities of how history remembers the motivations behind the Confederate secession. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.